Along on this Sunday morning on Johnny Barrow. It's once again time for our HOA Media Public Access Programming, broadcast on our 5 HOA Media Oahu radio stations, along with 4 on Maui and 5 on the island of Kauai. Another interesting and important topic to discuss, and this will be about what happened at the legislature this year. All right, a lot of things were covered. Was anything actually accomplished, and was it beneficial for the citizens of the state of Hawaii? All right, so as that comes to a close, Hawaii residents are still grappling with some of the highest living costs in the country. And this year, lawmakers debated a wide range of proposals, from housing reform measures to major tax increases that critics warn could make it even harder to live here in the islands. While many of the most aggressive tax proposals ultimately failed, legislators also approved changes to the historic income tax cuts from 2024 and advanced several housing bills intended to reduce permitting delays and lower construction costs. So joining me today is Ted Kafalis, and he is the Director of Strategic Campaigns at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. And his organization closely tracked this year's legislative session and advocated for policies focused on increasing housing supply, improving government efficiency, and protecting local residents from higher taxes. So today we'll discuss what passed, what failed, and what it all means for Hawaii families, workers, and the future affordability of our state. So very important stuff. Glad to have Ted along. Ted, good morning to you. Thanks for joining me once again.
Hey, good morning, Johnny. Always a pleasure when we get to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, so overall, Ted, how would you grade the legislature this session, and what's your biggest takeaway from the session?
Yeah, I'd probably describe the session as mixed. But I mean, it was ultimately better than what a lot of people expected when it started. Going into session, there was a real concern that lawmakers were going to pursue a lot of different proposals to increase taxes. And this is at a time when Hawaii families are already struggling with one of the highest costs of living in the country. Luckily, most of the major tax bills were killed throughout the session. So I think that shows that there's still recognition at the Capitol that affordability has to remain front and center. Our state is already losing residents every year because people feel like they can't build a future here. Mm-hmm. And so it was good to see at least lawmakers are increasingly aware of that reality. Now, that doesn't mean that they always agreed on the solutions. There's still a philosophical divide, I think, between those who believe the answer is more tax and government spending versus those who think we need more structural reforms that reduce costs and barriers. But I think it's at least encouraging that the conversation is becoming more focused on affordability itself, and I think that's really important progress.
All right. So one major tax bill, Ted, that did pass was Senate Bill 3125, SB 3125. Now, what exactly does it do?
Yeah, well, let me start with, I guess, some background. In 2024, Hawaii enacted the largest income tax cut in state history. The goal was to gradually reduce income tax rates across the board over several years through 2031. And, obviously that goal was to make Hawaii more affordable and competitive economically. This year, due to some federal cuts and some lack of government revenues, the governor actually proposed SB 3125, which would have stopped those tax cuts for everyone. But as the bill made it through the legislature, it was amended to keep most of those tax cuts in place, I would say, for about 98% of taxpayers. So specifically, individuals making up to $175,000 and couples making up to $350,000 are going to continue to see all of the planned reductions. Where the bill changes directions is at the upper income levels, the legislature decided to pause or stop some of the future cuts for high earners and create a brand new top tax bracket of 13% for income above $500,000 for single filers or $1 million for joint filers. That puts Hawaii's top marginal rate just behind California as the highest in the country. Mm. And so we have some concerns with the idea of continuing to tax the rich because these are people that are oftentimes business owners, entrepreneurs, doctors, people that we really need in our state. And we already face some pretty serious challenges. We have an isolated location. We have pretty high housing costs, expensive electricity, and everything needs to get shipped here. So, groceries and everything are pretty expensive. So in our view, this bill is a mixed bag because it does preserve those tax cuts, though. We do think that overall more negative than positive, since the vast majority of those folks will still receive tax relief.
In your opinion, was it due to constituents letting their voices be heard that there is at least a positive outcome, in your opinion, 50-50 kind of a split positive outcome, but did the constituents from having your ear to the close to the action, is that what really moved the needle in that direction, preserving the tax cuts?
Yeah, I think that's at least a portion of it. I mean, keep in mind, Johnny, that it has a lot to do with this being an election year. Legislators don't want to risk losing in the upcoming election because they might have increased taxes. And taxes, I would say, are almost never popular with most people. And that is in part, too, because people see that government isn't necessarily working for them. They see the corruption that's going on. They see the grass that may not be cut in the medians. They see a school system that is failing. And so, people see that as not necessarily working for them, but they also understand. We talked earlier about affordability. Most people are barely keeping up with the cost of housing or food or utilities, and they can't afford to pay more in taxes.
All right, Ted, you mentioned several tax hikes that failed. Now, which ones were the biggest concerns, and why do you think lawmakers backed away from those proposals?
Yeah, so there was a proposal to increase the capital gains tax, and this proposal comes up every year. It gets killed almost, every year. Mm-hmm. But it matters because capital gains taxes, they directly affect investment behavior. So higher taxes discourage investment in business and housing and economic development. And I think that's important because Hawaii already struggles to attract capital compared to some of the mainland states. So increasing those taxes really could have long-term consequences. There was also a proposal to have the state tax property, which that's another major concern because Hawaii has traditionally left property taxes up to the counties. So creating a new state-level property tax would have represented a major structural change, and it also would have just increased the cost of owning a home in general. Then there was another proposal related to conveyance taxes, which would have increased taxes on real estate transactions. And, this is at a time when Hawaii desperately needs more housing construction and more housing mobility. So adding costs to real estate transactions, we fear, could hold back the market. There was even another tax hike proposal on concert ticket sales and performing art sales. Any kind of event like that would be a show or a concert would be facing a tax. Now, luckily, these proposals all died. But, at the beginning of the session, when we first saw a lot of these, there was a lot of concern because, again, people are already at their limits when it comes to their budget. And so there really is not a lot of excess to go to paying these increased taxes.
Ted Kathalos, the Director of Strategic Campaigns at the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, joining us this morning on Johnny Merrill. And we've got some other bills that passed this session. Are there any that raised a concern for you and your colleagues at Grassroots Institute?
Yeah, I think a big concern for us coming out of this session is SB 2694, which deals with water carrier rate increases. Now, it probably sounds like a snooze fest, but companies like Young Brothers are looking to automatically increase their rates. And that's important because those companies are absolutely, Young Brothers is absolutely essential to our economy. because we're an island state, almost everything we consume comes in by ship at some point. It's like food, construction materials, medical supplies, your cars, appliances, you name it. So whenever we see a shipping cost increase and these rates go up, those costs ripple through the entire economy. And what really concerns us about this bill is that it would allow young brothers to raise their rates automatically without any sort of increase in customer service or trying to be better. And this comes on the heels, if you remember, the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, just passed a rate hike in January of almost 26%. So at a time when families are already struggling with affordability throughout the state, we really did not feel that it was appropriate for young brothers to be advocating for an automatic rate hike every year. Again, those increases trickle down to everything from increased grocery prices to higher construction costs. So, even when a bill like this sounds technical or industry specific, the real world effects can hit ordinary families on the neighbor islands pretty hard.
Yeah, I think they said that they wanted that bill to come into play so they wouldn't have these massive 26% increases with this incremental shipping rate increase. That was the logic that they brought forward, at least in the explanation of getting this bill passed. And we'll see how that plays out. Ted Kefalis joining me this morning from the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Looking at the session, Ted, as a whole, what do you think lawmakers got right?
Yeah, well, I think lawmakers deserve credit in a few important areas. First, they largely resisted the push for broad-based tax increases. And given the number of tax proposals that we just talked about, the final outcome could have looked very different this session. Second, I think lawmakers increasingly recognized that housing supply and permitting reform really need to be part of the affordability conversation. So, for years, we've talked, Hawaii in general has talked about housing primarily through things like subsidies and mandates. But the past few sessions have included more of a focus on the actual barriers that have prevented housing from being built. There were also a lot of positive reforms involving agricultural housing flexibility. Now, none of these bills alone is going to solve that housing crisis, but I think they represent a movement towards addressing some of the systemic barriers that are driving up costs. I think that, again, there's a long way to go, but I do think that lawmakers are beginning to engage more seriously with these underlying structural issues.
And how did that line up with that playbook that you recently released to the public at grassrootsinstitute.org, your housing playbook? I think there were 10 bullet points to that. How does what you just mentioned line up with what you brought forward at Grassroot?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of meaningful progress. I mean, especially compared to where the conversation was even just a few years ago. But one of those suggestions that we made was involving inclusionary zoning mandates. And there was a bill, HB 1741, which requires counties to actually study the economic impact of these mandates before imposing them. And that's important because, everybody, I think, wants affordable housing, but when you mandate affordable housing and it becomes too aggressive, then it unintentionally holds back housing production instead of actually addressing affordability. The key point is that housing affordability isn't just about demand, it's about whether the system allows housing to be built efficiently. So there was another bill as well that a lot of times we talk about shot clocks and trying to get permitting approval, putting a shot clock on that. We're in the NBA playoff season right now, and so I'm a big basketball fan. And if you note when watching basketball, the team has a set amount of time to shoot the ball. And so this shot clock does something similar for state agencies. This bill, HB 1710, specifically is focused on the State Historic Preservation Division reviews. Again, that sounds technical, but these reviews have become a major bottleneck for housing projects. Some projects face months or years of delays before even getting so much as the courtesy of a response. And when these projects get delayed, the costs increase dramatically. So, we were encouraged that a couple of these proposals were adopted and made it through, but we do think that there's still room to go even further.
All right. Some people worry because everybody wants to make things, like you just said, quicker, the process quicker, the shot clock. Worry about cutting red tape and getting rid of the regulations. Well, it could lead to cutting corners, Ted. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that concern is understandable. It's important to, I think, emphasize that streamlining and cutting red tape doesn't mean eliminating health or safety or environmental protections necessarily. The real issue is, I guess, whether the process is functioning efficiently and predictably. So right now in Hawaii, you have a lot of home builders, nonprofit organizations, and even just local families trying to build small housing projects, but they face constant roadblocks. A permitting process, I think, should absolutely enforce standards, but it should also provide timely decisions and clear expectations. What happens today is the projects get trapped in procedural limbo, where agencies, they miss deadlines, the reviews drag on indefinitely, and if you're an applicant, you have very little certainty about whether a decision will happen or even when it'll happen. So as a result, you have a lot of people that turn to getting unpermitted work done, which can be unsafe. And, for those that do wait in line for a permit, by the time you actually get one, if you get one, the labor and material costs have gone up astronomically. So I think, another thing that's important to understand is that excessive regulation can actually favor large mainland developers over small local builders. These big firms have the legal teams and financial resources to survive years of delays, where the smaller local guys can't often weather that storm. Mm-hmm. So, when we talk about streamlining, it's really about creating accountability and predictability. It's not necessarily about abandoning standards. You can protect the things that we care about while still having a permitting system that functions in a reasonable time frame, or quite frankly, just functions in general.
Ted Kefaulis, Director of Strategic Campaigns at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. A few remaining questions. Obviously, there's some hits and misses. Were there any opportunities that you think were missed this session?
Yeah, I think there were a few missed opportunities. One of the biggest disappointments to me was the failure of some of the government efficiency reforms. There was a few bills, actually, that would have eliminated long-term vacant positions, which seems like common sense reform. Like, these are positions that have been empty for 4 or 5 years, and what ends up happening is the departments use the money that has been budgeted for those positions as a slush fund for their department. And I don't really think that that's how things were intended, and I think the taxpayers, we deserve more transparency. Unfortunately, that bill died right at the end in conference committee after it made it 99% of the way there. And then when we talk, too, about housing, there were some housing bills that passed, and there was some progress there, but it was a little disappointing that some of the bigger permitting and zoning reforms were killed. Despite some of that progress that's been made over the last few years, I really think we need to be much more aggressive if we want to seriously address the housing affordability issue in Hawaii. The scale of our shortage is enormous. I'm not sure if you saw, there was a recent study from AARP that just came out that said we need 60,000 new housing units by 2050. These incremental reforms help, but they aren't going to be enough on their own. We really need to take bold action before it's too late. While there were definitely some positive developments this session, there's still, I think, a tremendous amount of work left to do if we want to reverse the long-term trends that have continued to drive local people away.
All right, Ted, great information once again. Where can our listeners go to find out more information about this? And I guess pretty soon we'll find out what the governor's decisions will be on this legislation. But where can the listeners go to find out more information?
Yes, so you can visit our website, grassrootinstitute.org. That's .org. Where you can sign up for our newsletter there. You can read our testimony. We have some research and really just stay updated on everything happening at the legislature. You could also follow us on Instagram at Grassroot Hawaii, where we post updates and short explainers throughout the year. And one thing that I will say we're especially excited about is we're going to have some upcoming legislative wrap-up events on Oahu, Maui, and Big Island. We'll be breaking down kind of what happened this session, what it means for Hawaii, and we'll be taking some questions from folks in the audience. So if anyone is listening is interested, just visit our website. That's grassrootinstitute.org, and you can register on our website.
Ted Cavalis with Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. Have yourself a fantastic remainder of your Sunday. We'll talk again real soon.
Thanks, Johnny. Always a pleasure. Look forward to connecting with you again in the near future.